The Artaxian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal wasps, their obsidian hulls reflecting the dying light of Earth's sun. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal Night, Admiral Lyra Vex watched the blue planet grow larger on her viewscreen, her silver eyes narrowing with anticipation. After 3 centuries of conquest, the last major independent human world lay before her. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of countless victories. The bridge crew, all members of her genetically enhanced Artaxian race, worked with practiced efficiency at their stations. "Earth's defense fleet is mobilizing, Admiral," her tactical officer reported. 87 vessels, primarily concentrated around their orbital defense platforms. They're forming a defensive line at coordinates Mark 7. Vex allowed herself a small smile. Humanity's last stand would be precisely where she wanted it. Their ships were impressive for such a young species, sleek, advanced vessels that had already bloodied her forces in previous encounters. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. Her fleet counted over 500 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to level a continent. "Open a channel to their command," she ordered. "Let's see if they'll spare us the trouble of a battle." The main screen flickered, and Vex found herself face to face with Commander Elena Reyes of the Earth Defense Force. The human woman's dark eyes blazed with determination, her brown skin marked with the scars of previous battles. She wore the midnight blue uniform of the EDF with pride, silver stars glinting on her collar. "Admiral Vex," Elena said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds against her. "I was wondering when you'd finally reach us." "Commander Reyes. Your reputation precedes you. The victory at Proxima Centauri was impressive." Vex leaned forward in her command chair. "You know why I'm here. Earth stands alone now. The colonies have fallen. The refugee fleets have been hunted down. Surrender, and your people will be spared unnecessary suffering." Elena's laugh caught Vex off guard. "Is that what you told the Centaurians? The Rigelians? We've seen what happens to species that surrender to you, Admiral. Slavery, genetic manipulation, cultural extinction, all in the name of your twisted vision of order." Vex's silver eyes hardened. "You're in no position to lecture me about morality, Commander. Your species spent centuries fighting amongst themselves before reaching the stars. We bring unity. Purpose. Evolution. We bring choice," Elena countered. "The freedom to determine our own path. Something you wouldn't understand." The tactical display suddenly lit up with new contacts. Elena had hidden a third of her fleet behind Earth's moon, and they were now burning hard toward Vex Force's flank. A clever move, but ultimately futile. "Admirable," Vex said, genuinely impressed. "But it changes nothing. You have 1 hour to surrender. After that, we begin orbital bombardment of your major population centers." Elena's response was to cut the transmission. Vex settled back in her command chair, watching as the human fleet took up defensive positions. They were protecting their orbital defense platforms, massive installations that could theoretically threaten even her flagship. But Vex had planned for this. "Launch the first wave," she commanded. "Target pattern Sigma 7. Let's see how they handle our new phase shift torpedoes." The battle that followed would be remembered for generations. Elena's smaller fleet fought with desperate courage, using Earth's gravitational field and their superior maneuverability to bloody Vex forces. The humans had learned from their previous defeats, adapting their tactics to counter Artaxian technology. But Vex hadn't conquered half the galaxy through brute force alone. As Elena's ships engaged her main fleet, specially modified stealth vessels emerged from hiding, having slipped through Earth's defensive grid days earlier. They struck the orbital platforms from behind, their weapons bypassing shields that had been considered impenetrable. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out. "The human commander, she's breaking formation. The EDF flagship is on an attack vector, straight for us." Vex watched as Elena's ship, the defiant spirit, cut through the chaos of battle like an arrow. The human commander had realized that with the orbital platforms falling, Earth's defense was doomed. This was no retreat, it was a suicide run. Fascinating, Vex murmured. All batteries, target that vessel. But, see if you can disable rather than destroy it. I want Commander Reyes alive. The defiant spirit's charge was magnificent. Elena's crew managed to destroy 3 Artaxian cruisers before concentrated fire finally crippled their engines. As the human ship drifted, its hull breached in multiple places, Vex ordered her boarding teams to prepare. Broadcast on all frequencies, she commanded. Earth's orbital defense network has fallen. Your military leadership is in custody. Continue resistance, and we will have no choice but to demonstrate our power. Surrender now, and your lives will be spared. She watched the planet below, waiting for the inevitable capitulation. But as reports of Elena's capture reached her, Vex felt something unfamiliar, a twinge of uncertainty. The human commander's words echoed in her mind, "We bring choice." The conquest of Earth was about to begin, but as Vex studied the planet's glittering cities and vast oceans, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory would be different. Something about these humans, about their stubborn defiance in the face of impossible odds, suggested that breaking their spirit would not be as simple as breaking their military. "Bring Commander Reyes to my quarters," she ordered. "I want to understand what drives these humans to fight so fiercely for their freedom. Perhaps in understanding their strength, I'll find the key to truly defeating them." Little did Admiral Vex know, but her desire to understand humanity's resolve would be the first crack in her empire's foundation. The story of Earth's conquest was about to become the story of an empire's transformation, sparked by the defiance of one human commander who refused to accept defeat. Breaking point. 2 weeks after Earth's fall, Commander Elena Reyes stood at the viewport of her prison cell aboard the Eternal Night, watching her homeworld rotate slowly beneath her. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, you couldn't see the burning cities, the refugee camps, or the Artaxian processing centers where humans were being evaluated for their roles in the new order. The cell door hummed open, and Elena didn't need to turn to know who it was. Admiral Vex's footsteps were distinctive, the confident stride of someone who had never known defeat. "Your people continue to resist," Vex said, moving to stand beside Elena. "Despite overwhelming evidence that it's futile. 12 major uprisings in the past week alone. The latest one in what you call New Zealand nearly succeeded in destroying one of our primary command centers." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Did you expect us to simply accept chains?" "I expected you to be rational," Vex replied. "Look at your world, Commander. We've brought order. Advanced medical technology. Clean energy. Your people could thrive under Artaxian guidance. As servants," Elena spat. "As experiments. I've seen the reports, you're already talking about genetic optimization of human populations." Vex's silver eyes narrowed. "Evolution requires guidance. Left to their own devices, species stagnate. We've uplifted dozens of civilizations, made them stronger, more efficient. Made them more like you," Elena interrupted. "Stripped away everything that made them unique. Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time you saw art from a conquered world? Heard music that wasn't approved by your cultural adjustment bureaus?" The question seemed to catch Vex off guard. She was silent for a long moment, studying Earth's curved horizon. "You're an interesting specimen, Commander. Most military leaders I've encountered focus on strategic concerns, weapons, territories, resources. But you speak of art and music as if they're as important as survival itself." "They're why we survive," Elena said. "Why we fight. Every piece of music, every painting, every story, they're expressions of human freedom. Of our right to choose who we want to be." Before Vex could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The Admiral's communicator crackled to life with urgent reports. A coordinated attack was underway, resistance cells striking multiple Artaxian facilities simultaneously across Earth's surface. But something about the pattern felt wrong to Elena. The attacks were too obvious, too predictable. A diversion, Vex realized at the same time Elena did. But by then, it was too late. The ship shuddered violently as explosions ripped through several decks. Elena had wondered why her captors had kept her in a cell with a viewport. Now she knew, they'd wanted her to watch Earth, to see the futility of resistance. Instead, she'd been watching for signals, subtle light patterns from the surface that looked like random industrial activity to Artaxian sensors. Chaos erupted in the corridors outside. The resistance had smuggled advanced AI viruses into the ship's systems through seemingly innocent civilian communications. Security protocols were failing, doors opening and sealing at random, life support systems fluctuating. Vex's silver eyes blazed with fury as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have you been planning this?" Elena finally turned to face her captor fully. "Since before you reached Earth. We knew we couldn't win a conventional battle. But humans, we're very good at playing the long game." The ship rocked again. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow that made Vex's pale skin look blood-stained. The Admiral's communicator was a chorus of panic now, reports of similar attacks on other ships in the fleet, of ground forces suddenly finding their advanced weapons failing, of automated systems turning against their masters. "You'll never make it off this ship," Vex said, her voice deadly calm despite the chaos. "Even if your people manage to rescue you, the fleet will reduce Earth's surface to ash in retaliation." "No," Elena replied. "You won't. Because that would mean admitting to your empire that humans, primitive, unmodified humans, managed to hurt you. That we found weaknesses in your perfect system. How long before other conquered species started wondering if they could do the same?" The look that crossed Vex's face confirmed Elena's words had struck home. The Admiral's hand moved to her weapon, but she didn't draw it. They both knew that killing Elena would only make her a martyr. "You're playing a dangerous game, Commander," Vex said softly. "No, Admiral. I'm not playing at all. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. It's about showing the galaxy that your way, your vision of perfect, controlled evolution, isn't the only path forward." The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Emergency bulkheads began slamming shut throughout the vessel. Through the viewport, Elena could see other ships in the fleet going dark, their systems compromised by the same viruses that were crippling the flagship. "Even if you escape today," Vex said, "nothing changes. We still hold Earth. We still have overwhelming military superiority. This act of defiance will only bring more suffering to your people." Elena's response was cut off by a massive explosion somewhere deep in the ship. The deck pitched sharply, sending both women stumbling. As emergency sirens wailed and chaos spread through the mighty flagship, Elena met Vex's gaze one final time. "You're wrong, Admiral. Everything changes today. Because today, we proved you're not invincible. And that's all the galaxy needed to know." The lights went out completely, plunging the cell into darkness. When emergency power restored minimal illumination 30 seconds later, Elena was gone. Vex stood alone in the cell, watching as escape pods began launching from ships across her fleet, each one carrying human prisoners to waiting resistance vessels that had somehow slipped through the chaos undetected. The Admiral's fists clenched as she realized that this wasn't just a prison break or an act of sabotage. This was a message, to her empire, and to every species that had ever been conquered by the Artaxians. The age of unquestioned domination was over. The real war was just beginning. Seeds of revolution. The Artaxian High Council chamber was silent as Admiral Vex's report concluded. The massive holographic display at the center of the room showed the spreading chaos, not just on Earth, but across a dozen previously pacified systems. 3 months had passed since Commander Elena Reyes' escape, and the Empire was facing something it had never encountered in its 3 centuries of expansion: organized, effective resistance. "This is unprecedented," First Speaker Marius declared, his aged features twisted with concern. "The humans' tactics are being adopted by other species. The Centaurians have destroyed 3 processing centers. The Rigelians are sabotaging our supply lines. Even the Proxians, who have been loyal subjects for 50 years, are showing signs of unrest." Vex stood before the council, her silver armor bearing new battle scars. "The humans are providing more than just tactics," she said. "They're providing hope. Every small victory against us spreads across the networks we can't control, inspiring more resistance." "Then we must make an example of Earth," another council member snarled. "Orbital bombardment. Complete sterilization of the surface. Show the galaxy the price of defiance." "No." Vex's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "That would only prove Commander Reyes right. It would show every species in the Empire that we fear them. That we can be hurt." The mention of Elena's name brought scowls to several council members' faces. The human commander had become a symbol of resistance, her image appearing in propaganda across the Empire. But it wasn't just her military victories that made her dangerous, it was her message. The idea that species could evolve and advance without Artaxian guidance, that diversity and freedom were strengths rather than weaknesses. "What do you propose then, Admiral?" First Speaker Marius asked. "Your personal experience with the human commander gives you unique insight." Vex activated a different holographic display, showing tactical data from recent engagements. "The humans aren't fighting us like other species have. They're not trying to match our military strength. They're attacking something far more fundamental: our certainty. Our belief in our own superiority." The council chamber erupted in angry mutters, but Vex continued. "Every time we adapt our technology to counter their viruses, they find new weaknesses. When we modify our genetic enhancement protocols, they discover ways to reverse the changes. They're forcing us to question assumptions we've held for centuries." "You sound almost admiring, Admiral," one council member said dangerously. "Perhaps your judgment has been compromised by your encounters with Commander Reyes." Vex's silver eyes flashed. "My judgment is clear. We're facing an enemy that thinks differently than any we've encountered. The humans don't just fight for survival, they fight for ideas. For the right to choose their own path of evolution." Before anyone could respond, emergency alerts began blaring throughout the council chamber. The holographic displays flickered, showing new attacks across the Empire. But these weren't military strikes. Instead, banned art, music, and literature from conquered species were being broadcast on all frequencies. Stories of resistance, of cultures surviving despite Artaxian suppression, flooded the networks. "Impossible," First Speaker Marius whispered. "These transmissions are coming from within our most secure facilities. From our own worlds." Vex watched the chaos unfold, remembering Elena's words about art and music being as important as survival. The humans hadn't just inspired other species to resist, they'd reminded them of who they were before the Empire. Of what they could be again. "Admiral Vex," Marius said, his voice heavy. "You will take command of all military forces in the Earth sector. Find Commander Reyes. End this insurgency. Whatever it takes." Vex bowed slightly, but as she turned to leave the chamber, a strange thought occurred to her. For the first time in her long career, she wasn't certain victory would mean the same thing it always had. The hunt for Elena took Vex's fleet through increasingly treacherous space. The resistance had grown sophisticated, using captured Artaxian technology in ways its creators had never imagined. But more disturbing were the changes Vex observed in her own people. Young Artaxians were asking questions that had been forbidden for generations. Why did all species need to follow the same path of evolution? What if there were other ways to advance? The Empire's perfect unity was showing cracks, and at the heart of every crack was the influence of human ideas. Finally, after weeks of pursuit, Vex sensors detected Elena's ship in a remote star system. The human commander had been coordinating with resistance cells across 3 sectors, but now she seemed to be operating alone. It was suspicious, but Vex had no choice but to spring what was obviously a trap. As the eternal night dropped out of hyperspace, Vex found herself facing not just Elena's vessel, but a graveyard of ancient ships from dozens of species, civilizations that had fallen to the Empire centuries ago. The human commander had turned this celestial cemetery into something else, a monument to resistance. "Open a channel," Vex ordered, and Elena's face appeared on her view screen. The human looked tired but determined, her dark eyes still burning with that same defiance Vex had seen months ago. "Admiral," Elena said. "I was wondering when you'd find this place. It's fitting, don't you think? All these ships, these remnants of free species, watching as history changes." "Surrender now," Vex replied, "and I'll ensure your people are treated fairly. This has gone far enough." Elena smiled sadly. "You still don't understand, do you? This was never about surrender or victory. It was about showing the galaxy, showing your own people, that there's another way. Look around you, Admiral. Look at what your perfect empire has cost the stars." As if on cue, Vex's tactical officers reported strange energy readings from the derelict ships. They weren't as dead as they appeared. Somewhere in the graveyard, a signal was building, preparing to broadcast something across the Empire's networks. "What have you done?" Vex demanded. "I've given the galaxy back its voice," Elena answered. "Every ship here contains the complete cultural archives of a species you conquered. Art, music, literature, philosophy, everything you tried to erase. And now, thanks to your own technology, everyone in the Empire will have access to it. You can't stop the signal, Admiral. You can't stop people from remembering who they are." The graveyard of ships began to glow with renewed energy, and Vex realized that the true revolution wasn't being fought with weapons at all. It was being fought with stories, with songs, with the unconquerable human spirit that had somehow awakened something long dormant in the galaxy. The war for the future of the Empire had entered its final phase, and Vex was no longer certain which side she was truly fighting for. Echoes of change. The meditation chamber aboard the Eternal Night was supposed to be a place of perfect silence, but Admiral Vex could no longer find peace within its crystalline walls. The cultural archives from Elena's ship graveyard had spread through the Empire like wildfire, impossible to contain. For the first time in centuries, the Artaxian leadership faced a weapon they couldn't counter: truth. Vex stood before the chamber's viewing portal, watching distant stars burn. Her silver eyes reflected the cosmic light as reports continued flooding in. On Centauri Prime, the processing centers stood empty, their genetic modification chambers destroyed by their own operators. The Rigelian shipyards, once dedicated to building warships for the Empire, now produced vessels of their own design. Even on the Artaxian homeworld, young ones gathered in secret to share forbidden art and music from other species. "Admiral," her second-in-command's voice came through the intercom. "We've detected Commander Reyes' signature. She's leading a fleet of unusual composition." Vex moved swiftly to the bridge, where the tactical display showed something unprecedented. Elena had assembled ships from every species in the Empire, not just recent conquests, but races that had been under Artaxian control for generations. They flew in formations that combined different species' tactical doctrines, creating patterns Vex's tactical computers couldn't predict. "She's united them," Vex whispered, a mix of horror and admiration in her voice. "Not under human leadership, but as equals." The rebel fleet was heading for the Artaxian homeworld, but they weren't moving like an invasion force. Their weapons weren't powered up. Instead, they were broadcasting on all frequencies, music, art, and stories from hundreds of cultures, including ancient Artaxian works that had been banned since the Empire's founding. Orders, Admiral, her tactical officer asked, hands hovering over the weapon's controls. Before Vex could respond, Elena's face appeared on the main screen. The human commander looked different, not tired or worn, but transformed. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had already won. "Your sensors show we're not here to attack," Elena said. "We're here to return something you lost. Your own history, Admiral. Your people weren't always conquerors. We found records in those ancient ships. The Artaxians were once known throughout the galaxy as artists, philosophers, healers." Vex's fingers tightened on her command chair. "You're manipulating historical data to serve your agenda. Our path of evolution is clear." "Is it?" Elena interrupted. "Look at your fleet, Admiral. Look at your own crew." Vex did, and what she saw shook her to her core. Her officers were transfixed by the transmissions, their normally perfect discipline cracking. Some were openly weeping as they heard music from their homeworld that hadn't been played in centuries. Others were sharing looks of awakening, of recognition. "Your empire was built on the belief that there's only one path to advancement," Elena continued. "But evolution isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming more diverse, more adaptable. Every species you conquered had something unique to offer the galaxy. Including yours." The tactical display suddenly shifted, showing movements across the empire. Ships from every fleet were changing course, heading toward the homeworld. Not to attack, but to witness. To be part of whatever was about to happen. "You're starting a civil war," Vex said, but her voice lacked conviction. Elena shook her head. "No, Admiral. We're ending one. The war between what your people became and what they could be. Between control and creativity. Between uniformity and diversity." As if to prove her point, new signals began broadcasting from the Artaxian homeworld itself. Young voices, old voices, all sharing their own stories, their own songs. The dam had broken. Centuries of suppressed culture and individuality were pouring out. "The High Council will never accept this," Vex warned. "They already have," Elena replied softly. "Check your secure channels." Vex did, and what she saw stunned her. The High Council chamber was in upheaval. First Speaker Marius stood at the center, tears streaming down his ancient face as he listened to a piece of music, one he had composed himself, centuries ago, before the Empire banned individual artistic expression. "It's not too late," Elena said. "Your people don't have to choose between advancement and identity. Neither does any other species. That's what we've been fighting for, not to defeat you, but to free you. All of you." Vex looked around her bridge again, seeing the change in her crew's eyes. They were remembering who they had been, imagining who they could become. The perfect, unified empire was transforming into something else, something more chaotic, more beautiful, more alive. "If we stand down," Vex said carefully, "if we accept this revolution of yours. What then?" "Then we build something new," Elena answered. "Not an empire of conquest, but a federation of equals. Each species free to follow its own path, to share its gifts with the galaxy. Including the Artaxians." In that moment, Vex understood what Elena had known all along. The human commander hadn't been fighting against the Empire, she had been fighting for it, for its soul, for the beauty and creativity it had sacrificed in its quest for perfection. The choice before Vex was clear: she could order her fleet to fire, starting a war that would tear the Empire apart, or she could help guide her people towards something new, something that honored both their past and their potential. As Elena waited for her answer, the stars seemed to burn brighter, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, watching to see what path the Artaxians would choose in this moment of transformation. Dawn of freedom. The Great Hall of the Artaxian High Council had never been so full. Representatives from every species in the former empire stood together, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. Admiral Vex watched from her position near the ancient speaker's podium, her silver armor replaced with traditional Artaxian robes that hadn't been worn in centuries. 3 months had passed since the day of revelation, when Elena Reyes had brought the lost cultural archives to the Artaxian homeworld. The Empire hadn't fallen, it had transformed, like a chrysalis breaking open to reveal something new and unexpected. The Federation Charter is ready for ratification, First Speaker Marius announced, his voice carrying the weight of history. Each species will maintain its autonomy, free to pursue its own path of evolution and cultural development. We will share knowledge, not impose it. Grow together, not through conquest. Elena stood among the Earth delegation, her commander's uniform now bearing symbols of both human and Artaxian design. Her eyes met Vex across the chamber, and a silent understanding passed between them. They had both changed, just as the galaxy around them had changed. Before we proceed, Vex said, stepping forward, I request permission to address the assembly. The chamber fell silent. Many still viewed her with suspicion, she had been the Empire's most effective military commander, after all. But as she took her place at the podium, Vex saw not fear in the eyes watching her, but curiosity. For 3 centuries, she began, we Artaxians believed we were guiding the galaxy toward perfection. We thought evolution had a single path, and that our role was to force every species along it. We were wrong. She gestured to the assembled delegates. Look around this chamber. Every species here has its own gifts, its own wisdom, its own way of seeing the universe. The Centaurians' mathematical poetry. The Rigelians' living architecture. Human art and music that changes and adapts like life itself. Vex's silver eyes found Elena in the crowd. Commander Reyes showed us something we had forgotten, that true strength comes from diversity, not uniformity. That evolution isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming more fully ourselves. The chamber erupted in appreciative murmurs. Among the delegates, artists from different species were already collaborating on new forms of expression. Scientists were sharing theories that combined different cultural perspectives. The Federation wasn't just a political entity, it was a renaissance. But our greatest challenge lies ahead, Vex continued. We must learn to grow without losing ourselves. To advance without erasing our past. To be strong without demanding that others bend to our will. She reached beneath her robes and produced something that made the Artaxian delegates gasp, an ancient musical instrument that hadn't been played in public since before the Empire. Its crystalline surface caught the light, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the chamber walls. In the age before the Empire, Vex said softly, this instrument was played to mark moments of great change. Its music was said to help us see the path forward. Her fingers touched the crystal strings, drawing forth notes that seemed to capture both sorrow and hope. The melody was hesitant at first, like a child learning to walk, but it grew stronger as other musicians in the chamber began joining in, humans with their violins, Centaurians with their gravity harps, Rigelians with their wind sculptures. The impromptu concert became a symbol of everything they were building, different voices coming together, not in perfect harmony, but in beautiful complexity. Elena made her way through the crowd to stand beside Vex at the podium. I never expected this, Elena admitted quietly as the music swelled around them. When I started fighting, I thought it was just about saving Earth. And I never expected to thank the person who brought down my empire, Vex replied with a small smile. But here we are. The galaxy is changing, Commander. We're all changing with it. The Federation Charter was ratified unanimously that day, but it was the music that everyone remembered. The sound of freedom, of species choosing to grow together rather than apart. Of evolution taking 1,000 different paths toward a future no one could predict. As the delegates dispersed to begin building this new future, Elena and Vex stood together at a viewport, watching the stars. Ships of all designs moved through the system, not in the rigid formations of the Empire, but in patterns as diverse as the species that created them. What now? Elena asked. Vex's silver eyes reflected the starlight. Now we do the harder work. Building something new always is harder than destroying something old. But I think we're ready for it. All of us. A message from Earth appeared on a nearby screen, children performing a new piece of music that combined human and Artaxian instruments. In the background, the first collaborative art installations were rising in cities across the planet. The revolution they had started wasn't ending, it was evolving, growing, becoming something neither of them could have imagined. To the future, Elena said, offering her hand in the human gesture of friendship. Vex took it, adding the traditional Artaxian bow. To all our futures, she replied. Above them, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if reflecting the light of countless species finally free to forge their own paths among them. The age of the Empire was over. The age of freedom, of diversity, of infinite possibility, had begun.